instead of being up in the top 10% of school system, we're in the bottom. And there's got to be reasons for that. And I think it comes back to policies that have been put in place that undermine our education. In this segment of Marion Voices, Teacher Challenges, we'll explore some of the constraints that hinder teachers from being effective. Our guest is Mark Avery, president of Marion Teachers Association, the union representing teachers. Glad to have you with us, Mark.
Thank you.
And also my co-host, glad to have her with me.
Yeah.
So anyway, educators know that what makes effective teaching. It's establishing clear learning goals and objectives for students, keeping students engaged with interactive teaching methods, creating different assignments and materials to meet the learning needs of a variety of student learning styles, and establishing an orderly classroom with clear behavioral rules. All of those things are a whole lot more difficult than just me saying them, right?
Yes.
But we've also seen news stories about banning books in school, banning certain ideas, or how topics are presented, prohibiting students really from exploring some historical events or people or that sort of thing. How do teachers manage those kinds of?
Oh, we said it was going to get juicy.
How do they manage? So, they reacted different ways. Some teachers, as that law was passed, so it was a law. It wasn't just that our district suddenly said you can't use these materials. And I believe, that teachers ethically know that they're supposed to protect students, and they would not intentionally give them things that were inappropriate. But the question becomes, what do you view as appropriate? So, and I think as the legislature has pushed towards parental rights and parents getting to choose, they've now, I believe, have infringed on other parents' rights. So it's okay for a parent A to say they don't want their child to read Harry Potter. But does that mean the school should remove it so no student could read it? And that's always been a parent thing, right? A parent's always supposed to try to oversee what their child is exposed to. And it's even more difficult in this day and age because of technology and stuff. So as those books get banned, in some aspects, it's going to limit what students are exposed to. Or on the other side of it, it just encourages them to go and read it. So my daughter is a high school teacher in Osceola County, and her students all have electronic devices as part of their. She goes, they can just go access the books that our county puts on a list that says they're not accessible. That just encourages them to go read it. And the issue we were just talking about, those advanced courses, that becomes an issue because some of the curriculum that they're expected to teach, they're no longer allowed to. So, for example, one of the number one books banned across the state is called The Bluest Eye. Mm-hmm. That was my daughter's favorite book, and she was an IB student in her language arts class. That was her favorite book, and now she would not be exposed to that because they pulled it from all the schools. Now, can you still teach those concepts in a different book? I'm sure you can. I'm not, but it just still limits that ability for those advanced teachers to be able to provide the curriculum. If it's an international curriculum that people are supposed to be allowed to accelerate in, you're limiting some of our students, and that's part of that give and take to it. And now I know I got off topic of what your question was.
No, that's right on. So what we're talking about is when there are in the classroom, if there is a conflict between what parents want and what teachers want, how is that and if it's in a kind of a gray area, is there some kind of protocols that teacher uses?
Do they go? Should you go to Facebook and put it on blast?
No.
Is that the number one chain of command?
Right. So our district, and I believe all the districts, had to create some sort of mechanism for parents to challenge a book, and you don't actually have to be a parent, which is one of the ironies. You can just be somebody in the community, and you don't think kids should have that book. Or I would tell you there was a group that wasn't even from our county that came up and had a big
list
hoo-ha at our school board meeting about that one.
I heard of in one county, some people came up and protested having banning the Bible from schools because of the different images and language in it.
Right. So, and I mean, and their message when they came was, well, we don't want pornography in school. Well, there's not a parent that's saying to put.
I don't want pornography in school. No, nobody wants pornography. No teachers want pornography in schools.
And so that was not what was going on. But this was a group that they weren't even from our county. They rode a bus up from a different county just to make a stink about it. Now our district has a policy about, if you want to challenge a book, and there's a very specific set of steps, you can find it on their website that tells you how to go through that. And there's a panel that will review the book and the reasons. I know they changed the law this last year that you must live in the county. So there was a person that was just going to every county and challenging all these books, and they had nothing to do with that county, just because, I don't know why they were doing that, but they were doing that. So, and it's died down as far as from when it first started, but it's still a reality. So you focus on the standards. The district actually has curriculum maps, and the teachers can follow and what resources to use to accomplish those things. And so as we have a pool of inexperienced teachers, or teachers that are still learning, because this turnover is so great, that is a huge resource for them to use, because there's, in some subjects, there's actually lesson plans already written for them and they just need to put their own individual parts to it about the students they teach and stuff like that, differentiation and accommodations and things that they would use. So
as a parent who maybe does feel differently about the banning books in general, and doesn't have some of the very strict conservative views on some of the books that maybe I read in high school, or, were part of the curriculum where I grew up. And my child wanted to do a book report on one of those books. Are they allowed to, or is it they're not? Is my child? Do I have any say in this, or my child, or is it just that those books are are not tolerated in this county? So period.
Those books are not allowed to be. They're not available at the school.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean as a parent you can't, go to Amazon and buy them or expose your child to them. They can't tell the kid they can't read them.
Yeah.
But
can they tell the kid they can't report on it on a
would they
class?
Not
No.
Okay. Yeah, it was just a question. Would they be able to write a book report on that, or I don't know.
So the irony to this, I find this a little ironic as the book banning came. So about 20 years ago, there was a Newsweek article about book banning, because this is not something new.
This is not new.
Right. And I go to read this article, and Marion County is in the first part of this article, because our library, a public library, not the school system, public library, had an issue where they wanted to they were banning one of the books, or they did ban this book. So at the time, and this was, I want to say, in the 50s or 60s or something like that. It was just kind of,
so it's part of our culture.
Right. So, but I'd have to find out.
Yeah, I didn't know, because I'm like, it does seem like you said, to some extent, and I understand some parents, and every parent has a right to be like, I don't want my child to read that book. And even when I was a child, that was an option. Parents could say, my child's going to read a different book, and that's what they did. But if I don't feel the same way, now this book is no longer available at the library, and I don't know. Sometimes it does feel like it takes away from other students' experiences.
The piece we left off of there was that if the teacher violates this law, so they can get they can lose their certificate. And the media specialist at every school is also tasked with now of vetting those that they're grade level appropriate and they're okay. So if I have a book in my classroom that hasn't been approved by the school or the district, and there's a list, every single school you can go and look and see what books are available at that school. And the legislator writes the law, but then the Board of Education, the state board, they interpret it. And so they interpreted libraries to mean classrooms. And so then they took it from not just what was in the library, but what was in every teacher's classroom was technically available for students. And so they expanded that interpretation. So we had teachers that literally just packed up thousands of books and said, they're not going to be available this year because I'm not going to jeopardize my career.
It's liability.
Right. So, and so that's a part of that. And I would tell you that probably all those books are fine. I mean, they've been using them for years and no parent complained about them.
And that kind of brings me to if you limit the kinds of teaching materials, doesn't that in some way limit a teacher's ability to engage students? Because students have lots of different interests.
Yes.
And, the best learning is when a student really wants to learn what the teacher's teaching.
Yes.
And
so the state has been very good about limiting the way teachers can teach, things that they could do. Limiting the resources that they could use. The one that really bothers me is I talked about all the rules they put on testing. So I think a fundamental relationship between the teacher and the student is when the student performs that they want reassurance, right? You give them a paper, here's a grade. But, well, when they take these state tests, you're not allowed to talk to the student about it. You're not allowed to look at them, the test. You're not allowed to post on social media. The students are even told they're not allowed to post on social media, which is kind of crazy. You can talk to your parents, but you can't talk to the teachers. So as a teacher, it always frustrated me because a student, would want to come and say, oh, I had this kind of problem and this is how I did it. No, don't talk to me about it. I can't talk to you. I can't even talk to you about that. And so I'm not trying to learn a question. I'm not trying to share. I'm not trying to give somebody an unfair advantage, but you've taken away that fundamental piece of education between a teacher and a student. And that's wrong. That's hard. And that's one of the things that our legislator has
and you done. Never know. I mean, that's what we used to call a teachable moment, where all of a sudden the kid is interested in why or why not, and they want a teacher or somebody to explain it to them, and they will learn from that.
Right.
In their silence.
And the teachers are silenced, yes. And the students are literally, you have to sign these testing agreements. And the students one says that, they won't share this on social media.
So I guess it brings to my mind two different questions. One is on, okay, what kinds of, like in the classroom, if they can limit textbooks, do they limit the kind of technology that's used or how you use technology in the classroom?
There are filters on the technology, and I haven't been in the classroom, and I'm on leave, but I used to, YouTube can be fabulous, and it can also have things that aren't appropriate. I understand that.
Yeah.
But as a teacher, I'm supposed to follow those ethics and protect students and use the right things. And so I used to always argue because it was blocked at school for a long time, and then it was only available for the teacher. And so this kind of stuff about them filtering comes up all the time in districts. As a matter of fact, a teacher in a neighboring county, a friend of mine, came to school this week and had to do a lesson that's required of his program, and the sites that the kids need to use were all blocked by the county. And he goes, well, this is what we're supposed to do today. This is required for them. And I think it's an AVID program, and they couldn't get to the sites. And he's like, so how do I teach what I'm supposed to if the county is? And the district will tell you, well, there's a way to get those viewed and unblocked and stuff, but it doesn't happen overnight. And then, when you're moving on so that always becomes, and it's still just frustrating for the teacher and the students because.
And I feel like obviously children learn in different ways, and my son's very much a visual learner. So having the visual representation, YouTube has tons of resources, and yes, there's good and there's bad. And we all understand that, but I don't know, any way that you're limiting the different modalities and how a child is learning is a concern for a parent, and I'm sure for teachers. So.
Well, and also I think it sends a bad message in that if you say you block YouTube, and I agree there are things on there that are very educational and interesting, but we're supposed to be teaching kids to be lifelong learners, which, I know a lot of people, that go to YouTube to say, well, okay, type in under search, how do you do such and such?
Yeah.
Right.
And it comes up.
Yeah.
Right.
So if you're blocking the use of certain social medias, you're at least inhibiting for a while, their ability to practice using it and accessing it and getting information from it. But it seems to me.
Just like anything, I think in society, there's one bad actor that messes it up for the other one. So somebody had somewhere, it might not even been here, but that was a guidance that we
That's right.
had to take. Or, we advise don't have a social media account that students can access. Or, there's one teacher that used to have a class Facebook account, and then students could ask questions. They used it as a study group, but and he controlled everything that was on there. But again, when you open those things up, that's a problem. Ironically, our district used to say, it says don't have those accounts, but the state at the time said it was important that you had those accounts and you connected with students where they were. So, so that's a gray area. My advice is, you don't give students your phone number, you don't text students, and there's teachers that do that. And sometimes you have a field trip and you have a group of students, you need to get
coordinating transportation.
That does happen, but on an everyday, there's other ways they can email you. That you got to have. You need to set up ways for them. A lot of them the teachers use Dojo. I don't know if the students use it back, but there's other apps they use. Remind is something that a lot of the classes use. Some of those programs we were talking about, I know when my daughter was in IB program, they had their own their program had its own social media thing that all their work was supposed to be submitted on, and all the things were talked through. So it can be very beneficial when it's used the right way. So
it seems to me that textbook companies, in trying to meet students where they are and prepare students for the future, a lot of them have links and programs in the textbook as to where they could go to learn more about whatever, especially in social studies, to learn more about those topics.
So I know that, again, it's really just having the equipment now. So all of our textbook companies have to have an online version. They have to have things that are vetted by the district. They have an agreement with the district for single sign-on for the students. So just like our teachers have a dashboard to all the resources, the students have a dashboard to their resources that are specific, and the teacher can add things to their resources for them to use. My daughter uses a Chromebook in her classroom every single day, and she uses it to what the teacher tells them they have to check their work or check this assignment and stuff like that. And she's in 5th grade. So, and it just is going to vary by the teacher and the grade levels. I know our district uses Canva for all the different stuff. The assignments are there for the students and parents to get in there to see what their kids are supposed to be doing and stuff like that. So there's a lot of technology that is definitely being used in our classrooms.
And if you haven't been trained on it and you get a teaching job, then they have training for you?
Yes, there's a huge learning curve, especially as we change, add new platforms and stuff. But they have training classes for the teachers to do. Maybe not before they're hired or right in the beginning, but they're definitely overwhelmed. If you get in this middle of the year, they have people to help you in the beginning of the school year. The middle of the year is probably a lot harder. But the new teachers have mentor programs, and so people are there that they can help them. So,
And what about the teacher ethics? I mean, sometimes a person may come in to decide they're going to teach, and they come into a teaching role, and maybe they don't understand what they can and can't do as an individual in a public school. Has that been a problem?
Well, I mean, there is, I guess there could be, I could say yes and no, since that seems to fall under my realm all the time as far as guiding people to make better choices, or usually you find out after they've made the choices. The district, so in a perfect scenario, that you normally did all the hiring before the school year started, and the district would have 200 or 300 new teachers there, and we're always there, and we have a time slot and get to talk to people, and they go through different things with them. This one-day training has evolved into 2. At one point, it was up to 4 days, and then now we're back, I believe, to 2, and they have different sessions where the district gives them overview, and one of the sessions has always been about ethics and where the professional code of conduct is and stuff like that. There's a catch-22 with that in the state of Florida. So if we're all human, right? So we're all going to get a speeding ticket one time. This is my or some sort of ticket from police, and so this is an analogy I always use. So I ran the stop sign, or I got a speeding ticket. And the district says, okay, you made a mistake, and the district gives you your punishment, just like any employer would. But for teachers that have a teaching certificate, if it's considered ethical, the district is required to send that to the state Department of Ed and their professional practices, and they then can do another evaluation or investigation of that individual, and they can impose things up into taking away your teaching certificate, or anywhere in between. So, and that becomes this, because now you're being punished twice. That affects your ability to work in other districts. It affects your ability sometimes even to work in our district.
Especially if you came on in the middle of the school year and weren't present for the initial the ethics training, to then be subjected to that seems
right. Well, and what you do in the community,
intimidating.
We're talking about technology, so everybody has a cell phone, and so in the community, where you go in the community, you have to be very careful, because there's people that would say, "Oh, that's a teacher," and they shouldn't be at this establishment, or they shouldn't be saying that, and then they can call the district and say, "Well, I saw that teacher say blah blah blah," and that's considered not. It could be considered not ethical, because we're required all the time. Even if you have Facebook, right? Don't tie it to the district. Don't say something. You have to be positive. Even if you don't like what's going on, you have to put a different kind of spin on it. So
Speaking of Facebook.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. So social media, like I said, bullying happens with our students every day, with our kids. But it's also happening here locally on Facebook, on a particular Marion County Public School Parents Forum group that myself and a lot of other parents are on. And I would say at least a couple of times a week, a teacher is identified by name, grade, school, totally doxxed, and other than their home address, and put on blast. I would say it's bullying. I would say it's harassment, in the sense that they're going after a grievance that they've heard secondhand account from a minor, their child, which I understand upsets. I get it. It's a primal protective urge to want to fight for your child. And I think it's a reaction that they're, or overreaction that they're having, and they're needing to vent, but they're putting it on this group, and then they'll even admit that they haven't spoken to the teacher, the school, the administration about the incident, but then ask has anybody else had a negative experience with this person? And it just snowballs into this very negative, very derogatory, very nasty smear campaign against someone that we don't even know if it's substantiated or hasn't been properly addressed, or I don't know. I just feel like if I were the teacher and I was seeing this or reading these comments or posts, I mean, I don't think I could sleep. I'd be sick to my stomach. It could just be a misunderstanding or a miscommunication that usually gets resolved and cleared up. How are teachers handling this? Because it is happening a lot in Marion County.
And I think every teacher is different on how they handle it. So personally, I wouldn't waste my time reading it because there's more important things in life,
Yes.
right? If if it's a problem, they should come and talk to the teacher. Yeah. But unfortunately, social media has made it easy for people to not be nice to people or say things that without checking the facts with no repercussion. So it does happen occasionally where, you know, it says this school and this teacher or this grade level teacher. A lot of times it doesn't specify the teacher, and then you're trying to figure out exactly who it is. And sometimes, you know, the district has somebody that monitors that or tries to look at that. And so they might, you know, talk to the principal and say, keep an eye out for this, or have you heard anything? And it's important, though, that communication, because that bad actor thing, there could be truth to it.
Of course.
And that is the scary part today. So you can't just
you can't ignore
the
it.
Can't ignore it.
Yeah.
So, and that was one of the concerns at one of those elementary schools a couple of years ago, that the parents said that the school ignored all the complaints. And so the district is very adamant about not ignoring the complaints. So I don't know. I mean, how I would handle it and how another teacher handles it are different. So some teachers get very upset about it, and you know, they would be, like you said, they wouldn't be able to sleep, and other ones are be like, you know, if it's an issue, my boss will come talk to me, and we'll go over that. I mean, I guess I would only worry about it if it was true. Right?
Yeah, I mean,
those things, and it's interpretation, right?
Well, it's interpretation, but it's also a character assassination of yourself. And I think a lot of teachers work, like you said, on the clock and off the clock. You have an image that you have to maintain and uphold, where you're a moral, ethical. You know what I mean? You have to be this upstanding citizen 24/7, and it's a lot of work. I mean, because you are always under a microscope. And so then to have something taken out of context about you, and then suddenly everyone's reading about you, I mean, it's got to be tough, even if it's not true, and you know it's not true.
That's the problem when it's not true. But we can't control everything.
No.
I can't control. I mean, if there's 46,000 students and how many parents, I mean, we can't. Yeah. We can't control that. Just like some of the other groups in Marion County, they're on Facebook. I look at them and go, really? Because that's not just like, you know. Yeah. So.
One thing I will say is my experience, both as a teacher and as a building administrator, was that if I had a problem with a student or there was some kind of issue, if I called that parent right then and talked to the parent and told them the situation from my perspective, then when the kid got home and told his version, the parent was much more willing to be kind of open-minded and look at it from both sides. If the kid got home and told the parent their version before I got to the parent, then the parent was closed-minded, and I would catch all kinds of heck. So I guess my experience would tell me if I've got a problem with a kid, I'd get a hold of the parent right away. You know, it may not do any good, but I would be willing to bet that 8 or 9 times out of 10, it would diffuse the whole thing right then.
Well, and that's when the district, they want the teachers to communicate with parents, good, bad, indifferent. They want, and the parents should be reaching out to their students, teachers, some way. The issue becomes logistics. We work this time, you work that time. I send an email. How many emails do you get a day? Do you have time? So that becomes an issue on all, and the teachers go, when am I supposed to do it? I call parents during my planning time.
Yeah, they don't have time
from 2 to 3. Well, they're not answering the phone, or you're calling me at work. And why are you calling me at work? Or one of my favorite things I used to have the students do, we had awards at the end of the year for the 8th graders, and it was a big deal. Their parents could come, and it was a night, and I would have them call their parent. I would write a script for them, and I would have them call their parent, and the first thing they would say, "I'm not in trouble." So the first, and then they always had to tell them they loved them at the end. That was, but they always start off, because calling them some positive news. Hey, I want you to know that I'm going to get this award, and you're invited, and they don't know what award. They just know there's an award. So, and that was kind of fun to watch the kids do that. I'm like, okay, now you call. And so
I love that was the first line, because whenever I get a call from the school during the day, your first thing is my child okay? Is my child in trouble? Because otherwise there usually isn't a lot of communication. So that's funny.
And that's something we're supposed to improve. And that's part of that parental rights. Parents should be involved in their kids' education. And the district is working on doing that all the time. So
I feel like it's gotten better, and it's usually the first line that we're given. So.
Well, I think also with that bash, there's a created persona that public schools aren't good, right? That you hear this across the country or even in our state, and that you need a choice, and the private schools or charter schools and such like that. The issue is that we're not treated equally. We're not. We talked about those test scores. Well, they don't have to do. They don't
even have to do them.
They're not compared with them, or they're given funding and the district's not. So for the last, I would say, almost at least 15 years, when the state does their budget, there's a section called PICO, is the acronym for it. And it's monies that are used to maintain buildings, right? All the money across the state has been given to only charter schools and not to the public schools. So even our district, if you watch some of the conversations about how are we going to get money to fix this school or do that, they're supposed to be in that PICO dollars, but they're not given those. And those are only given to the charter schools, for example. Or we make different rules for how they can hire staff or not hire their staff. And so that becomes a concern because you're pulling away money from the public for that.
And actually, if there's no testing, then how do you know that those kids are getting adequate education?
Well, there's some testing, but it's not scrutinized in the same ways as the public school is. And there's not the same expectations. And some of those schools don't have to do the testing. So really the thing would be when they're trying to go to college, or they want to go to another school. There's also no accountability. So you could send a school, look at even in our own district when the one high school charter closed, and they said, oh, by the way, next week you get all these students. And the district's like, okay, where are we going to put them in? But the funding that's tied to those students, that school already got and kept and spent. And the equipment never had to go back or anything. It just becomes that entities. And so that becomes one of the issues for that. So when they say they're public charter schools, well, it's because they're getting public money. And our district lists them on the website as these schools and stuff. But I don't represent their teachers. They're not paid the same because it's a whole different entity. So there's some similarities and differences. And I'm not knocking any of the people that work there because I know some of those people there are amazing educators. So I don't mean it that way. And I'm not saying that they're not trying to do what's best for students. My argument has always been that if you're going to give them, you got to treat us equally. You can't say, well, this is a better system, but we're not testing you the same way.
Yeah, the standards aren't the same.
Right, the standards aren't the same.
Yeah.
The expectation, we're going to give you a lot more money, but you have to build your team just as well as theirs and stuff like that. So,
All right, well, we're coming to the end of our session. I just wanted to ask one last question. Was there anything that you would like to present that we didn't kind of cover in some way here?
Well, a lot of our stuff was about Marion County. And in their defense, the rules are made in Tallahassee.
Okay.
And so those laws are made by our elected officials. And, the ones from our county, none of them are educators. Some of them are not even proponents of public schools, or they're proponents for private or charter schools. I watched at the Marion County delegation meeting where they didn't take any notes from when the school board spoke, but when some of the charter schools came up, they wrote notes, and they wanted money, and they wrote stuff down, and so that was discouraging to me because I don't represent that group. But these rules keep being made in Tallahassee, and the districts are forced to follow them and enforce them, but there's not the support, and they're not helping public education. They've been trying to break it apart. And so that's the biggest frustration we have, I think. And hopefully it will change some, but I don't know.
Yeah, well, and again, the way I started this whole thing was some of the negative results, performance data that has come out. And I got looking, I think Florida has either the third or the fourth largest gross state product, in the lower 48.
Mm-hmm.
And yet we have, instead of being up in the top 10% of school system, we're in the bottom. And there's got to be reasons for that. And I think it comes back to policies that have been put in place that undermine our education. But now maybe I'm totally wrong on that, but that's just my personal take on it.
No, that's numbers you can't argue with, that we're as you said, number 3 or 4. We have more money than some countries, or most countries actually. And yet our per pupil spending is very low compared to the other states, as you said.
Teacher salaries are low.
So our beginning teacher salary is towards the top 20. But our average teacher salary is 50th out of 51.
So they don't have a step up per year for...
We don't. Actually, that's against the law.
Wait, in Florida or...
In Florida.
There's no teacher
schedule. Because normally
there's no. So
well, in Vermont there was. I'm sure there's still
we
there.
We used to have a salary schedule.
Yeah.
So we no longer have a salary schedule. You must be paid on performance. So your test score is a piece of how much you're paid. And this all started around 2010. There are now 22 different laws that dictate how we can pay a teacher. And so we have to jump through all these hoops when we negotiate those salaries. And my teachers get very frustrated because they're like, well, you didn't get us enough. And I go, well, first of all, the district will say they don't have enough because they're not getting the funding they need. And that's why out of West Virginia is the only place that's below Florida in average teacher salary.
That's my state.
Just by a tad. So, and even DC. So that was where we got to the 51. They're all above Florida's 50. So that really made the governor upset last summer because we were touting that message. And so we're hoping that they'll maybe come around. He's supposed to release his budget in the next week, his proposed budget. So we're hoping there will be spending or funding for that. But
well, Mark, I've had a very interesting conversation with you, and I've learned some things, and I hope that maybe you'll come back in the future and talk with us.
Yeah.
I'll be more prepared next time.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, we come to the end of this session of Marion Voices, Teacher Challenges. Many thanks to Mark Avery, president of the Marion Education Association, for being with us today, and for my co-host, Susie Kuhn.
Yeah.
And we hope that the discussion has been informative and given you, our audience, some food for thought. Audience members are encouraged to send their comments and ideas about this topic or other topics to Marion Forum Group, one word, at gmail.com. You can also watch the whole episode on YouTube at Marion Forum Group. And while there, click the like button, subscribe, leave a comment, and share with your friends. Please join us for our next episodes. Until then, stay safe, be a good neighbor, and thanks for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good job.
Great job.